If we want to be able to access the data that's on the drives or the partitions of the drives that we put into our system, we have to mount them into our local file system. Now we can do that manually using tools like mount or umount, or we can use the etc.fs tab file to do it automatically on boot. But conceptually, what's going on is that we have a new hard drive or a partitioned hard drive, and we want to incorporate that into our file system. Now, it's really important to note that when you mount a partition or a hard drive, it goes into a folder, and that folder becomes what is in that drive. Now, we couldn't mount it on this folder because this folder already has things inside of it. It has to be mounted on an empty folder because it doesn't make sense to have all the things in this hard drive in this folder and then have these other folders alongside of it. So it has to be in an empty folder that we mount a partition or a drive. So we could actually take this hard drive and mount it into this folder if it's an empty folder. And that's what we're going to do on our system, is find an empty folder, and then all the files inside this drive will become part of our bigger Linux file system starting at this mount point. Now I'm here on an Ubuntu system, and I have the regular root mounted hard drive, and then I also have an additional 10 gig drive. And if we do lsblk, we can see that we have, well, a bunch of things here, loopback devices, but we have down here SDB1. Okay, this is a 10 gigabyte partition, and it's all set up and ready to mount, but it's not currently mounted on our system. So in order to mount that, I actually want to mount it in a folder. If we look inside MNT, there's a folder called 10 gig, and inside that folder is nothing. It's an empty folder. So I want to mount it on there. Now, if we do BLK ID, we can see a little bit more information about the device itself. So here is dev SDB1. Now here is the universally unique identifier for this partition. Keep note that this is something that's specified about the partition. We'll look at that in a second. But we know that it's type ext4. Okay, that's good to know. And we know that this is where the actual partition lives. So we can say mount. Now I'm going to say -T for type ext4. Usually mount can automatically figure out what kind of file system it is, but if we know, there's no reason not to do that. So I'm going to say mount dev sdb1, and where do I want it to mount? On MNT 10 gig. Press enter, and now if we go into MNT 10 gig, we're going to see, sure enough, now there's a lost and found thing. This is the root level of that hard drive, but now it actually lives in our file system right here. We can type mount alone on the line, and it'll show us where it's mounted, right? So right here, it's mounted on MNT 10 gig. So let me type CD, and then we can unmount it by typing umount MNT 10 gig. It's not unmount, it's umount. All right, so there. Now that's how we manually mount it and unmount it. If we wanted to have it mount automatically on boot, we would edit the file etc.fs tab. All right, and I'm actually going to stretch this out so we can see everything on here. We can see there's already an entry in here for the root file system, SDA1. But notice it doesn't specify it by its device. It specifies it by its universally unique identifier, which we could get by using that blkid command. It'll get us that UUID for the particular partition. Now we could use the UUID for dev SDB1, and we could put that in here to mount it, but I'm actually going to use, let me make another entry here. I'm actually going to say that the file system is on dev SDB1. We can specify it by device or by UUID, or we could even use the drive label if we want. But in this case, I'm just going to use the device itself. And then tab over. The next field here is the mount point. So I want this mounted on MNT 10 gig. Tab over. The next thing is type. It's an ext4. Options, I'm just going to say defaults. And then the last two fields are dump and pass. Now, dump is an old school backup program. It used to dump the files to a backup. This is really deprecated. It's not really used anymore at all. So dump, you're going to want to put 0 for dump. The last line, though, pass, this means, do you want it to run a file system check? 0 means never run a file system check. 1 means run the file system check first. So you put a 1 on the root partition. Any other partition that you want to have checked when the system boots up, you're going to put a 2. So I'm going to put dump of 0. You always put 0 for dump. And then pass is 2. It's the second most important because the root is the first one you want to have scanned, and then everything else is going to be 2. So you can have like 5 different partitions mounted. They could all have pass of 2. Now there's more to it to get it to scan automatically on boot, but when you're setting up the fstab file, this is where you do it. So save this, and now we could just type mount -a, and it's going to mount everything that is specified in fstab. And we can look by saying mount, and it'll show us that sure enough it remounted that because we defined it in fstab. And if we reboot the computer, it's going to automatically boot it, or it's going to automatically mount it as well. It's really easy to mount partitions using the manual tools. It's also pretty easy to use the fstab file to specify it, and you can either specify it by device name or the UUID that we can find out using the BLK ID program. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.